What would you do if you woke up one morning and found that someone had deliberately sabotaged your home, only for them to pretend it was just an accident? I always thought my life in the countryside would be peaceful, predictable. No traffic, no city noise, just me, my land, and the quiet comfort of knowing that what was mine would always stay mine. But one morning, that illusion shattered. A massive tree from my neighbor's yard came crashing down onto my property, taking out a section of my fence and blocking my driveway completely. Thick branches sprawled across the ground like the twisted wreckage of a bad accident. At first, I told myself it was just that, an accident. Storms knock down trees all the time. Except there hadn't been a storm. No wind, no lightning, not even a strong breeze the night before. The weather had been perfectly calm for days. So why had the tree fallen? And why now? I wanted to believe it was just bad luck, but something gnawed at me. Something felt off. I had security cameras around my property, not a fancy system, just enough to keep an eye on things. Out of curiosity, I pulled up the footage, expecting to see nothing but the tree collapsing under its own weight. Instead, what I found made my blood run cold. My neighbor, Travis, had been there. Standing right under the tree just moments before it came down. I leaned in, watching closely, my pulse pounding. Travis wasn't panicked, wasn't startled. If anything, he seemed to be waiting. He paced around the trunk, looking up at the branches like he was checking something. Then, as if he had received some kind of signal, he calmly stepped away. Seconds later, the tree crashed to the ground, right where he had been standing. A chill ran through me. This wasn't just a tree falling. It was planned. And I was about to find out just how deep this went. I grabbed my phone and called Travis immediately. My hands were shaking, my mind racing as the dial tone rang out. When he finally answered, his voice was casual, almost too casual. "Hey, what's up?" I didn't waste time. "Travis, were you near that tree when it fell?" A pause. It was short, but I caught it. Then came his response, laced with forced confusion. "What? What are you talking about?" I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my voice steady. "The tree that crushed my fence. The one that blocked my driveway. I saw you on my security footage. You were standing right under it." Another pause. Longer this time. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed. "Look, man, I don't know what you think you saw, but I know what I saw, Travis. You were there. You walked away seconds before it fell. So tell me, what the hell were you doing?" A deep breath crackled through the phone. Then, in a low voice, he muttered, "Maybe we should talk in person." I was already grabbing my keys. Minutes later, I was pounding on his front door. He hesitated before letting me in, glancing over his shoulder like he was afraid someone might be watching. The moment the door shut behind me, he let out a sigh and ran a hand through his hair. "Look, Ethan. I didn't push the tree or anything. But he exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I knew it was going to fall." I folded my arms, my patience wearing thin. "What does that mean? Why didn't you say anything?" Travis avoided my gaze. "Because it wasn't my idea." A pit formed in my stomach. Whose idea was it? The next words out of his mouth sent a chill through me. "Karen's." I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Karen from the HOA? What the hell does she have to do with this?" Travis finally met my eyes, his expression tired. "She told me that tree was a liability. Said if it came down, it would be easier for everyone. That maybe it would motivate you to reconsider your options." My pulse pounded in my ears. Motivate me? To do what? To sell, Ethan. I stared at him, trying to process what I was hearing. Karen had been trying to get rid of me? For what? Travis continued, his voice barely above a whisper. She's been working with the developers. They want your land. And she's making sure they get it. I felt sick. The fallen tree wasn't just a coincidence. It was a message. I stormed out of Travis's house, my mind spinning. Before I even reached my truck, my phone buzzed. An HOA violation notice. I clicked the email, my heart hammering. Citation 1, failure to maintain safe structures on property. $250 fine. Citation 2, grass exceeding acceptable neighborhood length. $100 fine. Citation 3, environmental hazard due to fallen debris. $500 fine, must be cleared within 48 hours. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Karen. I drove straight to her house, barely containing my fury. When she opened the door, she had that smug, rehearsed smile, like she had already won. "Well, Ethan," she said sweetly. "I was just about to call you." I shoved my phone screen in her face. "What the hell is this?" She barely glanced at it. "Standard HOA policy. Property upkeep is important, and unfortunately, you've let things slide. This is just a reminder." My hands curled into fists. Let things slide? That tree fell this morning. Her smile didn't falter. Exactly. And you should have handled it immediately. A responsible homeowner wouldn't let a safety hazard sit there. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "You set this up, didn't you?" She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "I have no idea what you mean." I could feel the rage bubbling up inside me. "Travis told me everything. About you. About the developers. About how you've been trying to force me out." For a split second, something flickered across her expression, annoyance, maybe even anger, but it disappeared just as quickly. "Travis?" she laughed lightly, waving a hand. "Oh, Ethan, you can't seriously trust him. He's easily influenced." "Right. The same way you tried to influence me?" She sighed, crossing her arms. "I was only trying to help. This neighborhood is evolving. Progress is inevitable, Ethan. You're just in the way." I wanted to shout at her, to tell her she had no right, but I knew Karen. She didn't play fair. She was manipulative, calculated. If I lost control now, she'd turn it against me. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "This isn't over." She smirked. "Oh, I know." And then, as I turned to leave, she added, "By the way, if you don't clear that tree in 48 hours, the HOA will escalate the fines. Wouldn't want that now, would we?" I walked away without answering, but inside, my blood was boiling. Karen wanted a fight? She just got one. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's smug smile, heard her condescending voice telling me I was in the way. My land, my home, something my father had worked his whole life to build, was nothing more than a stepping stone to her. A piece on a board she was trying to clear. The fines were just the beginning. She wanted to bury me in paperwork, drown me in red tape, make my life so miserable that selling would feel like my only option. I wasn't going to let that happen. At sunrise, I called Charlie, a lawyer who specialized in property disputes. We had gone to high school together, lost touch for years, but when I explained the situation, she didn't hesitate. "Meet me at your place in an hour," she said. When she arrived, I handed over the HOA violation notices, along with screenshots of the security footage showing Travis near the tree before it fell. She read everything carefully, her sharp brown eyes narrowing as she flipped through the paperwork. "This isn't just harassment," she finally said. "This is targeted. She's pushing you out." I nodded. Travis told me she's working with developers. That they want my land. Charlie sighed, rubbing her temple. That makes sense. I was looking into zoning applications last night, and I found something interesting. There's a proposal for a new development plan being reviewed by the town council. The catch? It requires rezoning a portion of privately owned land. She gave me a pointed look. Your land. My stomach dropped. You're saying they've been planning this for months? She tapped the papers in front of her. Longer. They've already filed preliminary paperwork. And guess whose name appears as a signatory in support of the project? I didn't even have to guess. Karen. Charlie nodded. She's not just enforcing HOA rules, she's working for the developers. She's been helping them set up this land grab, probably getting paid under the table for it. A wave of anger surged through me, but I forced myself to focus. What do we do? We need proof. Real proof. She handed me a legal pad. We need emails, records, communications between Karen and the developers. If we can connect her directly to them, we can take this beyond just an HOA dispute. We can shut it all down. I thought for a second. Dale might have something. He told me he and some of the other neighbors had been keeping tabs on Karen's shady dealings. Then let's pay Dale a visit. We drove to Dale's house, a small but well-kept place on the edge of the neighborhood. He answered the door with a tired expression, but when I told him what we had found, his face lit up with recognition. I knew it, he muttered, shaking his head. I knew she was up to something, but this, he stepped aside, waving us in. Inside, his kitchen table was covered in stacks of papers, printed emails, and handwritten notes. I've been keeping track ever since she started pressuring people to sell, Dale explained. Most of us didn't think much of it at first, figured she was just being Karen, you know? But then the offers started getting aggressive. First, it was letters from the HOA suggesting we consider opportunities for the future. Then it was direct calls from developers. And when people refused, he sighed. Let's just say, suddenly everyone was getting violations for ridiculous things. Charlie picked up a stack of printed emails and flipped through them. This is it, she murmured. I leaned over to read. The emails were from a development firm called Fairview Development Group, the same one tied to the zoning request Charlie had found earlier. But the worst part? Karen had been CC'd on every single one. In one email, a representative from Fairview wrote, "We appreciate your continued assistance in ensuring that property owners in your community recognize the value of transition. Your efforts in facilitating compliance and negotiations have not gone unnoticed." Below it, Karen had replied, "I believe we can get Ethan on board soon. He's proving to be stubborn, but I have strategies in place. Let's push forward with the next step." I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached. Strategies? What the hell did that mean? I scrolled further. Another email, sent 2 days before the tree fell. "We understand the need to be discreet. However, accelerating the timeline would be beneficial. Has there been any progress in softening his position?" Karen's response. "We're implementing pressure. Expect results soon." Pressure. My stomach twisted. That damn tree. The violations. The fines. She was the one behind everything. I turned to Dale. "Why didn't you go to the cops with this?" He sighed. "Because it's not illegal for a developer to make offers. And technically, it's not illegal for an HOA to enforce its own rules, no matter how corrupt the motivation." But, he pulled a manila folder from a drawer and handed it to Charlie. "I might have found something that is." Charlie flipped it open. Inside were scans of altered property records. "Karen's been manipulating boundary lines," Dale said. "Some of these changes don't match the county's official maps. It looks like she's been helping the developers shift property lines in their favor." Charlie exhaled sharply. "If this is real, this is fraud." I clenched my fists. "Then we have what we need." Charlie nodded. "Now, we take her down." I drove home with my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The weight of what we had just uncovered sat heavy on my chest. Karen had been manipulating property records. She had been working with developers for months, and she had admitted, in writing, to actively pressuring me to sell. That tree, the fines, the bogus violations, it was all a setup. A calculated attack to wear me down. And I wasn't the only target. Dale had kept track of neighbors who had been pushed out, fined into submission, or bullied into selling. The worst part? Karen had personally profited from every single one. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Charlie and I spent the next few days gathering everything we had, the altered property records, the emails, the HOA fines, and security footage of the tree falling. We prepared to file a lawsuit against Karen and the Fairview Development Group for fraud, property manipulation, and harassment. But I knew the legal fight alone wasn't enough. I needed the town to know what was happening. Charlie reached out to a local news reporter, a woman named Lisa Porter, who had a reputation for uncovering shady real estate deals. When I told her everything, she was immediately interested. "We're talking about potential corruption at the town council level," she said. "If what you're saying is true, this could be huge." The next morning, a camera crew pulled up to my house. I stood on my front porch, the same porch where my dad used to drink his morning coffee, and told the world exactly what was happening. I showed them the security footage of Travis near the tree. I read Karen's emails aloud on live TV. I held up copies of the fake property records and explained how the developers had been trying to push people out. The reaction was immediate. The community exploded. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak out before started coming forward. People shared their own stories of harassment. Homeowners who had sold spoke up about the pressure they had faced from Karen and the HOA. Karen went into damage control mode almost instantly. She held an emergency HOA meeting, claiming that I was spreading misinformation and that I was hostile toward the neighborhood's best interests. But it was too late. The truth was out. And then, Karen made her biggest mistake. 2 days after the news story aired, I received a formal notice from the HOA. Effective immediately, my property was being placed under special review due to its declining condition and failure to comply with community standards. The document stated that my home was now considered a liability to the neighborhood and that the HOA board had voted to force me to sell my property for the good of the community. I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. Charlie, however, was furious. "This isn't just harassment anymore, Ethan," she snapped. "This is an illegal attempt at forced seizure." I wasn't even surprised. Karen wasn't just trying to fine me into selling anymore. She was trying to kick me out. I called Lisa. She took one look at the HOA notice and immediately published an article exposing the HOA's latest move. The headline hit the local news within hours. "Homeowner fights back against HOA's attempted land seizure, corruption scandal unfolds." Karen's name was all over the article. But then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Karen betrayed the entire neighborhood. Dale called me that night. His voice was tight with anger. "She sold her house, Ethan." I sat up straight. "What?" "She sold it to Fairview Development. And she signed off on a contract removing neighborhood protections." I felt the air leave my lungs. Karen had been setting up this deal for months, and now that her cover was blown, she took the biggest payout yet, turning against every single person in the community. The moment she signed that contract, the developers had free rein to rezone, demolish, and build whatever they wanted. She had cashed out and abandoned the people she had claimed to protect. Neighbors who had once trusted her were outraged. The HOA board, now under scrutiny, tried to distance themselves from her. The town council, caught in the backlash, called for an emergency review of Karen's actions. But for me, this wasn't just about Karen anymore. I wanted the entire development deal shut down. And I was about to take the fight to the courtroom. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, neighbors, former HOA members, everyone wanted to see how this would end. Karen sat stiffly at the defendant's table, her expression blank, but I could see the tension in her clenched jaw. She had spent years manipulating rules, silencing homeowners, and bending the system in her favor. But today, she wasn't in control. Charlie presented everything: the fraudulent property records, the emails between Karen and the developers, the illegal HOA vote trying to force me out. The footage of Travis standing under the tree sealed it. Karen had been actively working to remove me from my home, not for the good of the community, as she had claimed, but to line her own pockets. When she finally took the stand, she tried to weasel her way out, insisting she had only been following HOA policy, and that Ethan was difficult to work with. But the evidence spoke louder than her lies. The judge's ruling came swift and sharp. Karen was found guilty of fraud, abuse of power, and conspiracy to unlawfully manipulate property ownership. The HOA was ordered to dissolve, and all the fraudulent fines and violations she had imposed on homeowners, including me, were wiped clean. The developer's rezoning request was denied, and the contract Karen had signed to remove neighborhood protections was ruled invalid. As I walked out of the courthouse, the weight I had been carrying for months finally lifted. Karen had lost everything. The developers pulled out of the project. The town council announced stricter oversight on HOA regulations to prevent this from happening again. And the best part? The community rallied together to rebuild, stronger than before. Karen left town a few weeks later. No farewell. No grand exit. Just gone. She had spent years controlling people, and in the end, she was the one forced out. Standing on my land, looking out at the home my father had built, I realized something. This battle had never just been about a tree, a fence, or a few fines. It had been about control: who gets to decide what happens to their home, and who gets to stand up when someone tries to take it away. What would you do if someone tried to force you out of your own home? Have you ever had to fight back against an HOA, or a Karen? Share your story below. Let's see who had it worse.